god, they did it! They did it! Bungie did it. They did it. They brought Challenge back to Destiny for like 48 hours, and then things just went back to their normal selves. The raid's a meme, all that. So let's talk about Crota's End in D2 after we talk about our sponsor, Crota from Destiny 1. Crota on day one in Destiny 1 was definitely not the meme fest that it inevitably became. It was tough to the point where we had my teammate Leopard leave our instance, go to the tower to level up to level 31 to gain any kind of advantage that we could, and then switch some jobs around once he rejoined. But Crota in D1 was the community's first real taste into what the community was capable of in terms of high-skilled challenges, because the raid was so easy and mechanics were also able to be abused or just completely avoided. And as a result of that, a lot of people wanted Crota to be turned into a dungeon. They wanted it also to be meme status or soloable. They wanted it like it was in D1. I think a lot of people underestimated the challenge potential of a Crota day one experience, especially after Root of Nightmares, which left a noticeably bad taste in the mouths of hardcore raiders for how easy it was on contest mode, not just overall. It's Crota. How hard could it be? Well, it was the hardest of the reprisal raids by what I believe to be a pretty long shot, and it is one of the longest day one experiences my team has had in quite a while. The Abyss was our first stop. This was one area that I felt was going to remain the most static, as it is a pretty iconic opening encounter with a simple goal: get to the end. For the most part, it did, but the addition of these swinging pendulums was a great touch that I don't think a lot of people saw coming, if anyone at all, as Bungie doesn't usually change the geometry of these raids, and that tends to include or add anything to it. They're not so threatening that they kill you with a tiny little scrape, but they're threatening enough that you definitely still need to pay attention to them, even on normal mode. The rest of the Abyss is the same, obviously minus the new Chalice mechanic and how all of that works, which was the major way that Bungie ended up changing the raid. I was anticipating the ending of the Abyss to feel a bit more threatening too, being greeted by 3 very well spaced out unstoppable ogres wasn't exactly what I had in mind. The run to the finale felt way more tense than the finale itself, so I think they could have pumped things up there. However, given how long of a run this can be, especially if you're stopping at most or all of the lamps, I can understand if they maybe didn't want to throw the entire might of Crota's army at you after a 7 to 10 minute trek. However, despite the Abyss only having 4 or 5 enemies stronger than a Thrall in the entire encounter, I have seen so much about how the Abyss is really hard, how LFG groups are struggling through it among other parts of the raid. Just think about that. There's no bosses. There's very little combat where you're actually threatened. People are just struggling, moving down a path. Next, we have the bridge encounter. The original D1 bridge encounter is one of the most flawed Destiny encounters in the franchise, as it is an encounter that doesn't really tell you when you failed or hit a state where it is no longer possible to proceed. It has also been the subject of abuse of many kinds, most notably dodging the entire bridge mechanic altogether. This time around, I do think it is a bit better with the ability to have both the sword and Chalice run across the bridge, with the Chalice being able to come back as well. I like the idea of this kind of relay race type experience, although on normal mode, you're kind of able to completely get around this by just giving everyone Enlightened and then dropping the Chalice into the podium. As long as nobody dies, which on normal mode is not that big of an ask, then it kind of defeats the whole relay back and forth situation that I think Bungie was going for. Otherwise, the core of this encounter is still the same: get 5 gatekeeper kills to then spawn more gatekeepers, and then you win. I think the thing that annoyed me about this encounter was just how long it took to get the bridge rolling. The first couple of minutes of this encounter just feel like they drag super hard because you're standing around waiting for the thing to get built, and that's with people dunking in Enlightened to get things going faster. That, or you're running the Enlighten Everyone Don't Die strat, which is 3 minutes of mindlessly killing enemies until you're ready to go. It reminds me of when I tried older Call of Duty Zombies modes like many years ago, and my friends would do like 10 to 15 minutes of crap before we could actually start the experience. It's just boring. And I understand that it's probably that long so that you maybe need to deal with shuffling around the Chalice and making those rotations, but it just doesn't feel like it needs to be that long. The ending too, I think, could have been sped up. There's just a lot of waiting around for what feels like no reason, and just because it was like that in D1 doesn't mean it needed to be like that in D2. As soon as we get the 5 gatekeepers dead, let's just get this done. You know, I don't need the wizards showing up and then an ogre wave and then more random enemies and then the knights. I get that time should be spent charging the Chalice to get enlightened onto people so that more people can pick up swords. But I really think we could just kind of move things along here. The day one experience is typically much more understandable than the normal mode version because part of the day one is having to deal with those tougher combat scenarios where there is an endurance element to it. As soon as you stop having to endure stuff to that degree, it's just kind of boring. It's why people don't like the second encounter of Garden or the first encounter of Crown of Sorrow. They are endurance tests where you don't need to endure anything. The Ear Ute encounter had the biggest room to make something happen because in D1, I mean, it was barely a fight in D1. You killed some enemies, and then you killed a few more enemies, and then you insta-give the boss, and then you were done. When the 390 version and challenge mode in D1 came out, that's when it kind of became some kind of an encounter, a big speed element to it with making sure that everything is dead. And I did feel like they were going to try to keep some of the speed element around as a result, and boy did they. This encounter is much more satisfying to play now. It might be my favorite of the whole raid. Having to keep the enlightened charges rolling, sprinting around looking for wizards, tons of enemies to kill pretty much everywhere. It is a very hectic fight with a lot of callouts. I think my only complaint is the lack of visibility of the wizards and shriekers in certain rooms. Having to use the radar to tell what you're looking at is a pretty unique experience in the game, but it's also something that I think more inexperienced players are really going to get confused about. And the spirit of the encounter seems more like you take a look in the room and you see what's in there versus trying to read your radar to see what's in there. Reading the radar is definitely a skill that will help more advanced teams move things along, like being able to see what's in the 3 rooms above you just by jumping up into the ceiling. But it's also possible to physically see into those rooms. Ear Ute has some pretty crazy movement sometimes, and that's probably to make her not too much of a pushover. She didn't end up being the massive damage check that I was maybe anticipating, although my team had some attempts where we fell short on damage because of that wild movement. But we were also able to two-phase her on the challenge mode during contests, so it was very doable overall. I think Bungie did a good job of keeping the spirit of the Crota encounter alive, with people whacking away at his shield with a sword to knock him down, basically the reverse of what you did in D1. Kept the Boomer Knights in the tower, but made them part of the encounter. Killing them triggers the Ogre spawns, and the Ogre spawns also being a part of the D1 experience that I imagine not a lot of people saw because they only spawned after 2 damage phases, and you could kill Crota within 2 damage phases very, very easily. The fight stays moving for the most part, although comes to a screeching halt if you want or need to pass around the Chalice for more enlightened buffs to deal with the Oversoul, which was also integrated pretty nicely into the fight. My main thing here, though, is just, like, I wonder how Bungie thought people were going to do this fight, both on normal and contest mode. Did they think the dominant strategy was going to be stack a bunch of wells and hit them with swords? Did they want people to do something else? Were those other things even successful? on day one. I don't think I know any teams personally that tried something like Rockets on day one. So did teams who didn't stack a bunch of Warlocks feel screwed, even though Warlock stacking isn't exactly a new thing when it comes to the contest experience? What if you had limited healing during contest? Just a lot of questions that I would love some insight into on Bungie's end. Like, what did they think people were going to do? What did they do during testing? The Chalice mechanic has definitely gotten some criticisms for just being an extra thing to keep track of, a game of hot potato, but I think it was integrated mostly fine during contest. Part of the experience is making sure that the proper people are buffed and ready. It is another thing to keep track of in what is already a pretty hectic experience. On normal mode, where there isn't as much urgency, is where I can see this mechanic falling a bit flat though. Again, the lack of an endurance test means the tension of making sure you're passing around the Chalice can make things feel slow. In terms of the day one contest experience specifically, sorry, I'm using those interchangeably, Bungie said that they dialed up the difficulty a bit. More enemies had shields that don't normally have the shields. We do even less damage to enemies, and enemies were more aggressive. And after Root of Nightmares, and honestly a good chunk of King's Fall, and many raids before that, I was very skeptical at Bungie saying that they were going to make things a bit harder. So, did they? Yeah, sort of. Now, were most generic enemies still just kind of falling over? Yes. I only really felt threatened by the bigger targets, knights, wizards, stuff like that. But my team definitely ran into some instances where we started to run low on res tokens or had to wipe because of a lack of res tokens. In previous raids, over the past couple of years anyway, this was rarely an issue for my team. I can't speak for other teams though, I don't know what other people struggled with, but for my team, running out of res tokens was rarely the reason why we wiped. Last year in King's Fall, I noted how insanely strong Solar subclasses were because we just got Solar 3.0, but it is clear that we are not taking any significant steps backwards when it comes to how strong we are or how many tools we have in our kit. Spoilers, all of the things that were really strong back then are still pretty good today, and a lot of the things that I was talking about last year still pretty much apply to, well, the entire game. In terms of any sort of damage checks, I think Bungie sort of brought that back with Crota. I think my team knew that Ute was more than manageable, but her movement could prove to be our downfall with a rocket-based strategy. Still, I don't think she was the big wall of the raid. I think that title goes to Crota. You really needed full ammo going into Final Stand, and even then, if something went wrong, if your well got crushed, if you didn't have healing at the exact moment, if the wrong person died, you wouldn't have enough to finish off Crota. My team experienced a lot of 2 to 3% wipes because of this. The Enlightened person got killed, people got meleeed out of a well got destroyed, although some of it was self-imposed failure, like multiple people dropping walls at the same time erroneously. And it felt like if we had just one small situation go our way, we would have been off Crota a lot sooner than we ended up. Fortunately, the ammo problems of War Priest were pretty much a non-issue during this raid, with Ute having a million Cenotaph targets and the Sword Bearers on War Priest being just enough to hit with Aeon finishers for power ammo. I never felt like we had a problem where we were on a good run but just ran out of ammo opportunities. That was not an issue whatsoever. Considering how tight the Crota damage check was, and how you needed a few things to go your way, this was appreciated, as I don't know how many wipes I could have handled due to low ammo based on how many of those close wipes we had with full ammo. I don't think Crota was as brutal as someone like War Priest, just for comparison's sake though. The proof that the raid was actually harder is not only anecdotal, but data-driven. According to Destiny Raid Report, Crota's End Challenge Mode was the lowest success rate day one experience, specifically day one, since Garden 4 years ago. That's Shadowkeep. For reference, Garden only had 549 people, not clears, people, with a clear of the raid within the 24-hour contest window out of 116,000 people attempting. That is 0.47%. On day one, the first 24 hours, there were 4,100 people with a challenge mode clear in total, a success rate of 1.2% versus everyone else who actually attempted. For comparison, again, King's Fall had over 17,000 people with a clear of challenge mode, with Vault not too far behind at 16,000, again in the first 24 hours. That is a huge, huge drop-off. Contest normal mode paints an even better picture. The first 24 hours, there were 10,667 accounts with a clear for Crota. King's Fall had almost 50,000, with Vault having 37,000. 343,000 people attempted Crota's End on the first day, pushing that to over 400,000 on the second day. Some of the highest, but not the highest, numbers we've ever seen for a raid race, with only a 4.8% success rate for the challenge mode after 2 days. This really shows the anomaly that was Root of Nightmares, which had a 25% success rate in the first 24 hours, with 90,000 people having cleared it, almost doubling over the following day. Of course, the D1 versions of these raids had even more abysmal numbers, but that was just a different era of the game, like 111 people clearing Vault, only 70 clearing Crota, with only Last Wish being fewer, and Spire of Stars being the only other raid in the same universe as those three, with 101 people getting clears. I've gotten the question about 24-hour versus 48-hour contest modes, and while I don't remember if I talked about it in the Root of Nightmares video, I assume I did. I will discuss how I am feeling now. Elitist Datto says that the clear that matters is the first 24 hours. Not only should the contest experience be about beating the raid, but it should also be about beating the raid with the least amount of information available to you. There are no hints, there are no guides, there are no posts, there are no videos. You just have to get in there and figure it out on your own. While I know that it is quite possible to get information within the first 24 hours, by the time you get that valuable information, it is usually very early in the morning, at least if you're in North America, which statistically speaking is around 60% of you watching this right now. That makes it much less feasible to act on that information for the average team. When you introduce an entire full day on top of that, the experience is cheapened by the fact that tons of new bits of information and strategy are coming out every hour, and more teams are able to capitalize on it, not actually having to figure out anything on their own. You still need to execute those strategies, sure, but a lot of the work was done for you. Regular Datto, on the other hand, says, I don't care if you have an emblem or not. I am just happy you bothered to even try in the first place. 48-hour contest mode is a compromise. Bungie works on Friday to make sure things are running smoothly, while the people who can only raid on Saturday actually get a chance to participate in one of the best Destiny days of the year. And I'm sure there are plenty of teams who also go into Saturday blind as well, for the fun of it, for the thrill of figuring things out on their own. I do not concern myself with the progress of the Saturday raiders. Again, I am just happy you even got in there and you tried to put something together. If anything, Saturday raiding gives me the opportunity to put out a guide that will get pretty good viewership. It monetarily benefits me. Some notes about my team in particular for those following our saga. 2022 was not a great year for my squad. In fact, it was our worst ever by far, with a 152nd place finish for Root of Nightmares and a 106th place finish for Crota. I was encouraged by the fact that we technically did better than we did in Root, but we still fell pretty short of our goals. Unfortunately, we had one of our members have a rather serious family emergency very shortly after the run began, which distracted them for most of their run, and who eventually needed to leave the team a few hours in. We were fortunate enough to have one of our coaches step in, take their spot, and contribute immediately to the team, so we didn't have too much downtime. That being said, I know my mental was down pretty bad around the time that he left, and for a solid 2 hours afterwards, because I was just very worried about my friend. I got a bit agitated during the Abyss as a result, but I eventually regained after the bridge encounter. I do believe that had that emergency not happened, we would have placed better in the raid race. I don't think we would have been in the running for a first place finish or anything like that based on how we were playing, but I think a top 75 placement is a reasonable guess. This is not to say we didn't experience our own failures, though. Still plenty of stuff we could have done much better, and plenty of wipes that were really, really close to going our way. No one on our team was mad at our teammate for leaving, and if anything, we were mad that they did not leave sooner to handle their business. Things happen, and real life is always going to be more important. To those who already knew about this, our teammate Sith is fine. Their situation is much better, which we are all very happy about. I appreciate all the well wishes that I saw in the comments of the guide video. So how about those challenges? Abyss Challenge was where you could only light one lamp per podium drop, so the amount of lamps you could activate was dramatically reduced. I thought this challenge was okay, just ended up making a lot of people abuse Eager Edge for all that it was worth, but the struggle here was mainly trying to not fling yourself straight into a podium. As long as you stayed together, you were probably fine here. The bridge encounter is where the bridge can't be complete when you step onto it. This just takes some precision timing, and as long as you were lined up and ready to go, this did not end up being as big of a deal as I initially thought it was going to be. The Ear Ute challenge was where you had to cycle everyone through the Chalice before you could repeat players. So player 1 gets it, goes to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then back to 1. The challenge here is mainly just keeping track of who has and has not picked up the Chalice, but also in that final damage phase, you really needed to keep the Chalice rolling between players, which could create a lot of chaos. My team was able to avoid a lot of this chaos on our kill because we killed Ear Ute in 2 cycles, although we did have a 3-phase 3% wipe due to a death while killing a wizard, so we were able to handle this challenge pretty quickly as that 3% wipe happened about 20 or 30 minutes into our attempts. Finally, the Crota challenge was where you had to kill Crota's entire shield in one go. You couldn't just have one person go up, do some damage, then get another sword, go up, do more damage. This challenge was not particularly crazy. My team just ran with 3 swords. I think it was possible to do this with 2 swords, but you needed ideal damage every single time, and we did not want to rely on that. We just wanted to play it safe. So we did 3 swords, and it was not that big of a deal at all. The bigger challenge was simply killing Crota again, at least for my team it was, due to the, again, very, very intense final stand. I was a bit more entertained by the Crota challenges than I was something like King's Fall, especially the Oryx challenge, but overall nothing really got me super jazzed up or anything. I don't know if Bungie has spoken about this or will speak about it, but there was also an issue where people weren't getting the final triumph for the challenge mode, the Crota challenge, despite fulfilling the challenge requirement. Some people had to run multiple raids to get their challenge emblem, with some people still not getting their emblem after multiple kills. I really hope this gets addressed. In the end, Root of Nightmares did end up being a fluke when it came to the day 1 experience. Crota's End showed up and kicked a lot of people in the ass who were not expecting it. I think the contest mode changes Bungie made were definitely for the better, but I do wonder if the encounters themselves did a lot of the heavy lifting, not necessarily the enemies within them, despite me saying earlier that those things did affect my team a little bit. I'll definitely take the adjustments over not having them, though, because we are still so formidable, so strong, so hard to kill, that anything to close the gap is going to be better than nothing. The damage check at Crota, and potentially for some teams at Ear Ute, proved to be a big deal, and I am glad that damage checks still exist, because I think they should exist. Not only should you be able to prove you know mechanics, you should still need to prove your ability to execute on a damage strategy. But even something like the Abyss is proving to be problematic, as I've seen quite a large number of people posting about how their LFG teams are falling apart because this ain't Root of Nightmares and you actually need to contribute now. Normal mode isn't exactly Mount Everest, with it getting trounced immediately after downshifting to that difficulty, but the fact that I'm seeing some of these complaints is pretty wild. It shows some of the damage done from Root of Nightmares, what a place that has 0 accountability can do to the raiding scene. The party's over, y'all. you actually need to look at a buff timer now and pay attention to callouts. There's no more I'm on ad clear for the most part, and I couldn't be happier about that. In terms of day one experiences, I would put this raid somewhere in the middle for my own personal rankings tier list thing, because while we did do better than Root, and while Bungie did indeed bring Challenge back to Destiny for a glorious 48 hours, we didn't do as well as we wanted to, and having a teammate have a family emergency doesn't exactly bring great memories. Bungie has also implied or hinted at they're looking to make the Final Shape raid something pretty tough, as they want the Witness to be a pretty big deal in raid boss world. So I guess we'll see what's in store for us in the Final Shape. The future of raiding is also in question. Will we see Wrath of the Machine next year? Will there be some kind of new raid experience in 2025 now that Bungie is shifting to a new type of DLC model? Here's hoping. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.